Before we start, I'd love to know where you're all watching from. Go ahead and comment with your country. It's always amazing to see how this community spans the globe. Today's story is a real one. It begins with a letter that was never meant to be read, and a soldier who carried a secret that was far heavier than the war he was fighting. This is the true story of Private Thomas Hawley, the American soldier who never came home. The story begins in November 1944 in the Hürtgen Forest, Germany. An American infantry squad is pushing its way through what was arguably the coldest, darkest, and most brutal forest of the entire war. Snow falls, mixing with the smoke of artillery fire. The ground is frozen, littered with the bodies of those who fell before them. German snipers are everywhere, a constant unseen threat stalking their every single step. Inside a destroyed German bunker, an American medic, looking for survivors or supplies, finds something completely out of place. It's a folded piece of paper, perfectly preserved inside a small metal cigarette tin. It's a letter. He turns it over, and on the back, there's a name written in pencil: Private Thomas Hall, 22nd Infantry Regiment. But here's the thing. Thomas Hawley was listed as missing in action. There was no body. There were no witnesses to his last moments. There was no record of him being evacuated to a hospital. He had simply vanished. All that was left was this letter. And what was written inside, it would eventually unravel a mystery that had been buried for decades. So, who was Thomas Hawley? Let's go back. He was born in rural Ohio in 1921. By all accounts, he was a quiet and soft-spoken young man, raised on farms where life was simple but hard. He was a natural marksman, which was common for boys who grew up hunting. But he was also a lover of poetry, a gentle soul who seemed out of place in the world he was about to be thrown into. Thomas Hawley was not a hero by choice. He didn't volunteer to fight. He was drafted. When he left, he said goodbye to his younger sister, Emily, the person he was closest to in the world. He made her a promise, the kind of promise so many soldiers made. He told her, "I'll come home, no matter what." But as everyone knew back then, especially in 1944, a promise like that was almost impossible to keep. His destination was the Hürtgen Forest, a place that would later be nicknamed the Forest of No Return by the soldiers who fought there, and it was a living nightmare. The fog was so thick, you often couldn't see 10 steps in front of you. The ground was seeded with hidden mines, buried under a carpet of leaves and snow. German artillery, cleverly hidden in the treetops, rained down shells on the American positions, a terrifying tactic called tree bursting. Entire U.S. platoons would just disappear overnight, swallowed by the forest and the relentless fighting. Thomas Hale's unit, the 22nd Infantry Regiment, was given a mission that military historians now recognize as nearly suicidal. They were tasked with clearing a path toward the village of Schmidt. It was a brutal, inch-by-inch fight against a deeply entrenched and experienced enemy. And in the middle of all this darkness, this chaos, Thomas Howell began writing letters home to Emily. He wrote about the cold, the fear, and his longing for home. But one letter, the one found in that metal tin box, was different. It wasn't meant for the mail. It was meant to be found. The letter starts with a chilling line. "If you are reading this, something has happened to me." He addresses it directly to his sister. "Emily, there is something I must tell you. I did something during this war, something I cannot live with," he continues, "and I carry a secret that must never fall into the wrong hands." He then goes on to describe a bizarre encounter in the woods. A German officer had approached his squad, holding up a white cloth, but the officer wasn't surrendering. He was carrying a briefcase filled with documents. He was defecting, and he begged the Americans to protect these papers, claiming they were of vital importance. Then Thomas writes something that sends a shiver down your spine. "A traitor walks among us. Someone in our own ranks wants these papers destroyed." He felt he was being watched, that he was in danger not just from the enemy in front of him, but from someone standing beside him. The very last line of the letter is a desperate plea. "Emily, if I don't return, the truth must." Hours after writing that letter, Private Thomas Hawley disappeared. And this is where part 2 of our story begins. Welcome back. In the first part of our story, we learned about Thomas Hall, a young American soldier who vanished in the Hurtgen Forest, and the mysterious letter he sent to his sister, hinting at a terrible secret. Now, we uncover what that secret was, and how it could have changed the course of the war. The documents the German officer handed to Thomas weren't just random papers. They were maps, but not just any maps. These detailed the German defensive lines, their artillery positions, and even planned troop movements for the Ardennes region. Historians who later examined them realized these were early, pre-war plans that mirrored what would become the initial stages of the Battle of the Bulge. If these maps were real, and if they had reached Allied command, they could have warned of the coming offensive, potentially saving thousands of American lives. It was an intelligence goldmine. But it raises 2 haunting questions. First, why would a German officer, a man who swore an oath to his country, risk his life to hand these plans to the enemy? Was he a defector? A double agent? Or was he simply a man who saw the inevitable end of the war and wanted to prevent more bloodshed? We may never know his true motive. But the second question is even more disturbing. Who in the American squad would want to silence him? In his letter, Thomas described what happened next. After the tense handoff, as the German officer melted back into the trees, someone from Thomas's squad followed him. Thomas heard arguing, and a single gunshot. Silence. The officer was later found dead, his death recorded as another casualty of war. But Thomas saw something that shook him to his core. The man who pulled the trigger was not a German soldier. It was an American. Thomas recognized him instantly. It was Corporal James Trent. Trent had a reputation in the company, and it wasn't a good one. He was known for looting the bodies of the dead, both friend and foe. He had a habit of disappearing during firefights, only to reappear when the danger had passed. He also harbored a deep, vocal hatred for anyone he considered a collaborator. Thomas believed Trent saw the German officer as an easy target, someone carrying valuables or secret information he could sell on the black market. He followed the officer not for military intelligence, but for personal gain. Thomas imagined Trent confronting the officer, demanding whatever treasures he thought the man possessed. But when Trent searched the body, he didn't find gold or jewels. He found the maps, and in that moment, he must have panicked. If these documents were real, his actions weren't just looting. They were treason. He had murdered a high-value source and compromised a mission that could alter the war. He had to cover his tracks. And there was only one person who had seen it all. Thomas. Thomas wrote in his letter. He looked at me with madness in his eyes. I knew he would silence me next. Without a second thought, Thomas turned and fled into the dark, unforgiving forest, clutching the maps the German officer had given him. He was no longer just a soldier fighting a war. He was a witness on the run, hunted by one of his own. For 2 days, he survived alone in the wilderness, dodging both German patrols and the man he once called a comrade. And then Thomas Hawley vanished. For decades, Thomas Hawley was just another name on a long list of soldiers missing in action. His family held on to hope, but as the years turned into decades, that hope faded. The war ended, the world moved on, and the mystery of what happened to him in the Hurtgen Forest remained unsolved. But secrets buried in the earth don't always stay buried forever. In 1999, more than 50 years later, a German historian was conducting research in the very same forest. Near the collapsed remains of an old German bunker, half hidden by soil and roots, he stumbled upon something. Skeletal remains. The historian notified the authorities, and an American recovery team was dispatched. Among the bones, they found a set of corroded dog tags. The name was still legible: Thomas P. Hawley. Forensic analysis determined the cause of death: a single gunshot wound to the back. He had been ambushed, executed while trying to find safety. But the most chilling discovery was what they found right next to him. Carefully wrapped in oilcloth, tucked away as if to protect it from the elements, were the documents, the maps, perfectly preserved. After all those years, the truth had finally come to light. Thomas Hawley had died trying to protect the secret he had promised to deliver. He had kept his word until his very last breath. So what happened to Corporal James Trent, the man who hunted Thomas through the forest? He survived the war. He returned home to Indiana, where he lived a quiet, unassuming life. He got married, had children, and became a respected member of his community. No one ever knew the dark secret he carried. But guilt is a heavy burden. Near the end of his life, frail and consumed by his memories, he confessed to his local pastor. He told him, "I killed a man in the forest because he saw what I did." When investigators, armed with the new evidence from the discovery of Hale's body, confronted Trent, he refused to give names. He refused to say anything more. He died just weeks later, taking the full story to his grave. His family never knew the truth about the man they called a husband and a father. But because of Thomas Hale's final act, we do. Once the documents were authenticated by U.S. Army historians, their incredible significance became clear. Had they reached Allied command in late 1944, they could have provided a crucial warning about the German buildup in the Ardennes, the surprise attack we now call the Battle of the Bulge. While it's impossible to say for sure, some historians argue that Hale's heroic, albeit failed, attempt to deliver those maps was one of the many forgotten what-ifs of the war, a single act of bravery that could have rewritten military history and saved countless lives. But Thomas Hawley didn't die for military strategy or for a place in the history books. He died for something much simpler, much more personal. He died for honor. He died to keep a promise. Thomas Hawley was never given a medal. His story never made the headlines. For over 50 years, even his own family didn't know the full truth of his sacrifice. But today, you know what happened in that forest. You know the story of a young man, far from home, who risked everything not for glory, but to bring a terrible truth to light. And even when he knew he wouldn't survive, he protected that truth. In the end, he kept his promise. Thomas Hawley did come home, not in body, but in truth. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories of forgotten history. Until next time.